Thank you for coming, and we appreciate the chance to hear. Simon Broadley knows more about MS and the treatment trials than anyone in Australasia, I think, so we're privileged to hear him. And I'm delighted to hear that Wallace is doing well in London. I'm expecting him to come back to replace me in the fairly near future to support Jennifer Pereira, who's hiding at the back there, who's my colleague in the MS clinic in Auckland. Now, I was going to keep this fairly informal, so if someone has a burning question as we go, I mean, we'll have plenty of time for questions. What I was going to do was just cover the new developments in MS and Pharmac's change in regulations and some of the complexities of it. And I think you should recognise that the change in the regulations at the end of last year is a great step forward. It allows us to treat people more appropriately with more effective disease-modifying therapies, but it doesn't solve all the problems that we were facing. And I'll deal with some of the issues that I think are still outstanding, and you will no doubt have questions, because I know there are some people here who are wondering why they're not on the new treatments already, and I can give you some partial explanation for that. I can't see these, but I can... this is a brief summary for those who have not been paying a lot of attention to what's happened in the past. But we've had access to beta interferons, two types, since 2000. And then at the end of 2005, Copaxone was added with a slight change in the regulations. But still, you had the requirement for these what we might call the old criteria, were pretty strict. You had to have 2 quite bad relapses in a year and significant residual disability. And you've been argued for a long time, although in 2000 that seemed like a good way to focus initial treatment when we had a limited availability. Over time it became clear this was not the right group to be targeting when you had limited access to treatment. So the new criteria do improve matters significantly, and I'll cover some of the details of them in a minute. It allows us to treat people earlier with not so frequent attacks and including people with no significant disability, which is an important group. The downside is that Pharmac's requirement is that we're not able to treat people with as much disability as we were treating before, so that's shifting the goalposts of the disability level to allow treatment. When they first provided access for Tysabri and Gilenya, or natalizumab and fingolimod, the initial plan was that they were the only ones we were going to be able to use, that we weren't going to be able to use the older treatments at all. There was a big fuss about that, because although they're not on trial data as effective as the new ones, they're very safe, and for many people they do work extremely well, and for those who are prepared to can tolerate the ongoing injections, it felt completely inappropriate not to offer the older treatments if people felt strongly about it, not just the patients but their neurologists. So Pharmac has agreed, and you'll see the wording later, that we can actually still use the older treatments. Although most, I have to say, who do get approval for treatment are going for the newer treatments. As I can just see that. This is the situation in the middle of last year, which is the last time I've got decent data for. So more people have been treated on the old regimen than people realise, probably. We've got 3,000 patients in New Zealand, roughly. And over the time of the old program, over 1,100 were approved for treatment with beta interferon or Copaxone. And at the middle of last year, about 660 were still on treatment, so quite a number had dropped off treatment for one reason or another. And interestingly, 2/3 of those who stopped treatment did so voluntarily, either because they couldn't handle the injections or they just didn't feel well on them. 1/3 were pushed off because they got worse, and Pharmac would not continue funding if you got significantly worse. You were able to switch, so that includes people who tried switching and still couldn't handle the injection. So I'm not sure what the figures are worldwide. It's a bit hard to get them, but having 2/3 of people stop treatment voluntarily was of great interest to us. People who are now offered an oral agent as opposed to injections does mean that more people potentially are going to be able to take treatment. Now these are the new regulations. I've got them, the key aspects detailed. There's a lot of small print in here. You have to have had at least one significant attack in the past year or two in 2 years, which is much better than it was before. You had to have 2 bad attacks. And Pharmac also insists on evidence of active MR disease. So you have clinical attacks, and you have to show that you have new activity on an MR scan as well. And they've changed the EDSS score to allow 0, which is normal neurologic examination, up to 4.0, which is being able to walk 500 metres without support or stopping, basically. To get to 4.5, it means you can't walk 500 metres, you can only walk 300. And this is the score that you've heard about, and most people would have some knowledge of, outlined going up to where none of us want to be. The key cut-off point is here, which is, so this is the new cut-off. In the past, we could treat people up to a level of 5.5, which means you could walk 100 metres without support. Pharmac has decided that people who are moving from up to 4.55 virtually all have secondary progressive disease, and worsening at that stage is usually due to low-grade progression, not to relapses. And so they have said that they won't treat people who can't walk 500 metres without support. But not only that, if you get worse on treatment and reach a score of 4.5, you have to stop. Which goes counter to what Simon Broadley said earlier this morning, which is that in most places, even when you get secondary progressive disease, there's a sense that it's better to continue treatment to prevent relapses, even if you're not stopping the secondary progression. That has been a controversial issue worldwide, and we've discussed it at length, but our sense was, when we raised this with Pharmac, that if it meant we didn't get this change to allow early treatment, if it was sticking with what we had or a change to a newer, much more rational system, we went with the new rational system and accepted there was a downside at the other end. Everything in life is a bit of a compromise. So that just relates to the relapses, and you have to have significant MR activity, which is one of the issues that has caused some of the hold-ups in getting people on treatment. But I'll come to some of those issues shortly. It's definitely an important step forward. This just summarises relapses. Now, a lot of people have fluctuating symptoms that might be termed loosely relapses, but a relapse in this sense means signs of new active inflammation, which means substantial change, and Pharmac has been very strict about this all along. So the new symptoms have to be significant, have to last a week or longer, change the score on the EDSS system or its subcategories, and not be due to other explicable changes not related to inflammation. So this is kind of strict, but an important aspect of this is it has to be determined by a neurologist or physician who's looking after you that it was a relapse. They don't have to necessarily have seen you at the time if all of the features of the relapse meet the Pharmac criteria. So it's important to, if you have a relapse and you can't see a neurologist at the time, or you're out fishing somewhere, if you see a GP or have some way of recording the event, particularly because people forget about what exactly happened, it can certainly help determine that the relapse meets the Pharmac criteria.